But just in terms of the market coming down and potentially making a lower low down here, to me, it's honestly, I've become more convinced that that's going to happen based on what's been happening in the stock market relative to Bitcoin. And I think you put it perfectly, is that altcoin money has really been what's been propping Bitcoin up, right? Bitcoin, like, alts are going lower. Bitcoin has been the recipient of a lot of that money and it's been grinding higher. You haven't really seen the NASDAQ's been making insane moves to the upside. Nvidia stock, I mean, take a look at this chart on Nvidia here. This incredible move, right? We made huge new all-time highs on Nvidia. Now, granted, it was the AI story, but it was drawing liquidity away, but there was no recipient. You didn't see Bitcoin breaking out when Nvidia had this move to the upside. So that's a concern, and the concern becomes that if the stock market, let's just say we pull back to this gap fill on a technical basis, this is probably where we're headed back to on Nvidia. So if we drop, that would be about 30% on Nvidia. Where is Bitcoin at that point?
The worst thing that could have happened to Bitcoin prices now happened yesterday. Bitcoin has been consolidating for almost a month in this sideways channel, and we were all expecting it to break to the upside, but it didn't. According to Gareth and Ben and their chart analysis, something terrible is about to happen to Bitcoin and the whole crypto market. Here's the entire overview.
As we get into it, right? So we've seen Bitcoin fall, beautiful little drop. We're actually breaking the 29,000 level as we speak. Take a look at this, guys. Now, one thing I've talked about, and I'll throw it to you in a second, Ben, is that we've talked about how this channel was insanely hard to break out of. And again, a lot of people don't understand why it's such big resistance. And I want to just show you here, folks. If you go back to the beginning of the bull market, right? So we were already trading up here, and we had this big move to about the 42,000 level, and we retraced right there, and it stalled, and then it rallied to 65,000. Then we came down 3 full times, 1, 2, 3, and we rallied to 69,000. And then we kind of came down, eventually consolidating right here and breaking down. And that's why this level is such a major technical resistance, because that was the buyer level. Back then, that was where everyone bought. So once we broke, it's now where everyone that bought in here is actually selling, right? They're like, oh my goodness, I got back to break even. I'm going to unload. In addition, it also has the aspect of being a technical level that I see. And so I've shorted multiple times into this level, as I'm sure many hundreds, if not thousands, of other technical traders have. So here we are breaking down, trading right around 29,000. And you could see how we kept on getting rejected. Even when closing above, you had a reversal candle. This is a topping tail. So topping tails are powerful. This was a green candle. This is called a reversal candle in technical analysis. And then we were hugging this lower level and finally the break point. So I wouldn't say that we're definitely heading straight down, but I think Ben and I would both agree that there's probably some weakness in Bitcoin coming in. We were just talking about it on the Spaces, Ben. But just in terms of the market coming down and potentially making a lower low down here, to me, it's honestly, I've become more convinced that that's going to happen based on what's been happening in the stock market relative to Bitcoin. And I think you put it perfectly, is that altcoin money has really been what's been propping Bitcoin up, right? Bitcoin, like, alts are going lower. Bitcoin has been the recipient of a lot of that money and it's been grinding higher. You haven't really seen the NASDAQ's been making insane moves to the upside. Nvidia stock, I mean, take a look at this chart on Nvidia here. This incredible move, right? We made huge new all-time highs on Nvidia. Now, granted, it was the AI story, but it was drawing liquidity away, but there was no recipient. You didn't see Bitcoin breaking out when Nvidia had this move to the upside. So that's a concern, and the concern becomes that if the stock market, let's just say we pull back to this gap fill on a technical basis, this is probably where we're headed back to on Nvidia. So if we drop, that would be about 30% on Nvidia. Where is Bitcoin at that point? Where is the altcoin market? And I would be scared to think about where the altcoin market is at that point. So I do think that if the stock market is to drop 10, 15, 20% from where it is, it's hard to believe that Bitcoin, if Bitcoin fell, so let's do this and think about this, right? So Bitcoin was at 69 and the stock market was at all-time highs. Bitcoin dropped to 15.7, then bounced 100%. The NASDAQ has rallied massively, right? And so if we fall, let's just say we fall back to these October lows on the NASDAQ, to me, why wouldn't Bitcoin be below 15.7 when it only has to drop about $14,000 versus dropping from 69 to 15 the last time we dipped down to these lows? Does that make sense?
Not only does Gareth believe this is happening, but the fear and greed index also changed a lot from last month's greed on a 64 to now being at a 50 neutral, which means that retail investors are also getting fear and probably selling some of their positions to prevent more losses. Just look what Ben has to say about this.
When the S&P gets a 5 to 10% correction, right? Like it'll happen at some point. We don't know when it's going to be. That's normally what stops the rally in crypto in the pre-halving year. And I mean, like you can see it over here when we got pullbacks in the S&P 500 back in about this time. Again, the pre-election year last cycle, we saw Bitcoin fade. What's interesting, Gareth, is I've been talking about the altcoin reckoning for a while, and I know you have too, the idea that alts just kind of bleed. They bleed on their Bitcoin pairs, they bleed on their USD pairs. There's this idea as well that it might not seem like it, but it is still tracking the .com crash, right? So look at the NASDAQ in the .com crash, and look at this double top here on the NASDAQ. It then went lower, put in a higher low, and then got rejected here off of that 20-week SMA. This looks identical to what is happening now with the altcoin market, right? You go above it, you put in sort of a double top, then you put in a higher low, only to potentially get rejected here. And I think this is where the concern could come in is, well, what happens if the altcoin market just sells off for the next 30 weeks or so? So it would be in that type of environment where there's no longer sufficient liquidity in the altcoin market to prop up the price of Bitcoin, right? And that's how you see Bitcoin go down, but the altcoin market still, the dominance of Bitcoin still goes up just because the altcoin market is going down even more. And by the way, if the altcoin market were to bleed as much as the NASDAQ did from this point, it would still be about another 50% drop, Yeah. So that I think is the issue with the altcoin market is we haven't really deviated from the .com crash. And you could even pull up, say, like the 50-week. I mean, look at where the NASDAQ got rejected off of this double top. It was right at the 50-week moving average. And if we care to guess where the 50-week is right now, that is exactly where the altcoin market here is potentially getting rejected. So I think that liquidity is drying up. I think it's certainly hitting altcoins before it hits equities, right? And we know that equities love climbing the wall of worry until the unemployment rate goes up. But I think crypto is going to get hit first.
And even though we know that Bitcoin will grow in the future, the short-term outlook looks ugly. And there's even more evidence that everything is falling apart, just like the .com era.
Living through and trading through the .coms, there was pet.com, there was, I make you a dinner.com. I mean, like every crappy idea was thrown out there and they attached a .com to it. And it got a ridiculous valuation. People would buy it. I mean, it could literally be like, hey, here's my dog's turd.com, and people were like, oh, $100 million valuation, just like that. And the idea here is, if you look at the comparisons of what we've seen in the crypto markets with these shit coins and these meme coins, it's so eerily similar. And what we know from the .coms is that you had to have a washout where, I mean, think about how many .coms, when you came in 2001, 2002, out of that period, how many .coms were really left at that point? I mean, at least the name brand ones, there was maybe 10, maybe 15, maybe 20. Well, very similar. You would probably expect the same thing with the altcoins, right? So there will be some that survive. I think you'd agree with that, Ben, but it will be way less than you have out there. And by the way, if you look at the NFT market right now, I mean, talk about a market that hasn't even bounced yet. I mean, that hasn't even had a slight bounce.
If you have an altcoin, if someone's out there and they think they found the perfect altcoin and they see it start to get pulled back down, it could be that it's just a function. It's because it's exposed to the market risk, right? It doesn't mean that project won't eventually do well. It's just, hey guys, like liquidity's being sucked up. This just leads to opportunity, if anything. Right. Right? It just leads to opportunity. Like you can view it as a glass half full approach if you want to.
Can Bitcoin recover instead of creating new lows? Let us know in the comments below, and watch this video to learn Mark Yusko's opinion on the future of this asset.